Good evening and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Evangelist Tia here on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Love Bay family, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Our topic on this evening is reporting domestic violence and sexual assault. We have with us our co-host, Erin Mitchell. And our guest for the evening is Samantha Robbins. She is the outreach specialist of the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments for our guests or our co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com, or you can text your questions or comments to 437-778-3299. Also, if you have any resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, your local organizations, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. And with that, I would ask Erin if you would go first and greeting our listeners and viewers on tonight.
Thank you, Evangelist Tia. Hello, Love Bay listeners from around the world. So good to check in with all of you this evening. So good to be on the show and to be a part of this really strong and growing circle of rising out of the ashes. It's such a good conversation we're going to have tonight, because I think that whether or not we report sexual or domestic violence is a very individual circumstance at each and every time. And I think there's going to be a lot of wonderful, positive perspectives that people can listen to tonight from our guest, Samantha Robbins, and the conversation that we'll have tonight. So just such an honor to be here with a group of strong women, and sending all of you love out there in the world, and strength and protection, and Happy New Year.
Thank you so much. Sam, if you would take a moment and greet our listeners.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm so honored to be here as well. I think Erin said it so aptly. So truly an honor to be here. I'm from the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County in Pennsylvania in the United States. So if at any time someone needs support during this call, you can reach out to our phone number at 610-565-4590. Also, the United States National Hotline for Survivors of Domestic Abuse is 1-800-799-7233. So if things come up tonight, I want to put it out there. Please be self-aware as we're talking about these challenging topics, but truly an honor to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So listeners, again, we say Happy New Year to you all. We are in the United States, so our new year started on January 1st, but we want to greet you all wherever you are. China, Europe, Paris, Australia, Germany, the Bahamas, wherever you are, we want to say Happy New Year. We want to start with sharing some additional resources to the ones Sam just gave. And again, a reminder on our project, myself, Erin, Bob, Rise Out of the Ashes, Inc. That's my nonprofit that I started. We are still raising funds. So if you would like to support our endeavor, you can go to GoFundMe and look for Rise Out of the Ashes, Inc. We support victims and survivors with immediate and emergency funding. We help with doctors' visits, transportation, food, clothing, school supplies, medication, personal toiletries. We assist with payments on rents, utilities, mortgages, whatever need a victim or survivor may have, including education. There are some individuals who want to go back to school and they need help with tuition. So if you want to help us in that endeavor, you can visit our GoFundMe page and make a donation that way. We want to share Pastor Darius Daniels. He's the pastor of Change Church. He has several locations in the United States. His website is dariusdaniels.com, and his YouTube channel is Darius Daniels TV. Again, Sam shared the 24-hour hotline number for ADAPT, the Domestic Abuse Project of Delaware County, which is 610-565-4590. I want to also share the National Teen Dating Abuse Helpline. Their website is loveisrespect.org. Their phone number is 1-866-331-9474. And in the UK, I want to share the National Domestic Abuse Helpline. Their website is nationaldahelpline.org.uk. Their phone number is 0808-2000-247. Or in the UK, you can also visit Women's Aid, and their website is womensaid.org.uk. And then we have the Asia Foundation. Their website is asiafoundation.org. And again, just a reminder, wherever you are, you can search for the national website or phone number in whatever country you're located in. That national organization or national number should be able to lead you to local agencies closer to where you actually live. But again, our topic on tonight is reporting domestic violence and sexual assault. And I believe that this is extremely important. The experience of domestic violence or sexual assault, I mean, if that is your story, it's not easy. And the process of reporting those assaults, if you decide to report those assaults, that's not easy either. And it's totally the choice of what the victim or survivor would choose to do or not to do. To seek medical attention, to move in and pressing charges, to not do any of those things. It's really your choice. And so now I want to turn this over to Sam, and we just go from there, because Sam, as you mentioned before, there are multiple paths to reporting. Everyone is not going to do the same thing. Everyone is not going to do it the same way. But I really believe, I really wanted on tonight to just give back autonomy, give back power, because it's your choice whether you report it or not, or how you report it, or when you report it. So I want to just give it to you right now, and just go from that point there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I always go back to, as an advocate to survivors, that justice is survivor defined. So there is no requirements for what justice looks like for each individual person that we serve. So someone might find justice through their local criminal or civil justice systems, and hopefully they have an advocate locally who's able to support them through that process if they need it. But for other folks, healing is justice. Joy is justice. Living healthy relationships that are fulfilling to them is justice. So with that said, acknowledging that there's so many different barriers and unique reasons why people may choose different paths is really important. So for people out there who are listening because they want to support survivors, recognizing that you want to empower that person, listen to them, and support them on whatever path they choose to take. And the survivors who are out there listening, knowing that you are the expert of your experience, and that there's people who are out there who will support you. So pull them closer to you. And then as you're making your choices and your decisions, having that support group, that support structure, empowering you and supporting you through that process. Now, I do want to acknowledge that there's so many different barriers that people may face in reporting. Some things like fear of retaliation. So if they do choose to report to justice systems, they could be fearful of consequences of that, getting back to the person that was choosing to abuse them, and that person choosing to abuse them being upset, and taking all different action against them. And that could be really dangerous action, which definitely having an advocate to support with safety planning, if that's the choice that's made, is going to be a real asset there, because we want to make sure that no one's alone through that process. Additionally, there may be family members or friends of the person choosing abuse who are also seeking retaliation against the survivor. And those people may just have never seen the side of that person that the survivor has seen. I tend to describe that when somebody is choosing to abuse another person, they often are described as being so charming, even by the survivor in the beginning of the relationship. They're so charming, they're so kind, they're so warm. But it's very intentional that the people choosing abuse don't necessarily show the other side of themselves to the people that are surrounding them and the survivor. So when a survivor says that something is happening, also being mindful of, you very intentionally may have had the abuse hidden from you by the person choosing abuse, that side of themselves that is choosing those manipulative actions. So the retaliation may not only come from the person choosing abuse, but also from other people that are seeking to support that individual, because they just are so confused. How could they have behaved that way? Other barriers that exist could be children. It could be that, all right, if I come forward and share this experience, how are my children going to be affected by that? What will the children hear? When people choosing abuse potentially end up in prison, and then that child is dealing with one of their parents being in prison, what are the ramifications of that? And there are supports out there. Advocacy agencies like the one that I work for support children in processing that experience all the time. So survivors never have to be alone when they're trying to support their children through these life changes that are happening. Additionally, other things that could come up are, for some survivors, fear of deportation. So they might be afraid to report because they don't want the attention drawn to them and to their family. I've worked with many survivors because in the United States, there's a lot of U visa, T visa options available for people who've been victims of crime. The Violence Against Women Act also has different reliefs and protections written into it to support survivors who are immigrants in the United States or not U.S. citizens. So some of those survivors who may be eligible for those reliefs may be fearful, or may also have information from groups that don't fully understand the criminal justice system. Like, I've heard survivors who've wanted to get a protection from abuse order, which is what it's called in Pennsylvania, but a restraining order, which tends to be the more broadly applied term. And sometimes people who are trying to support that survivor will say, oh, well, don't get a restraining order because then that could negatively impact you. The US government might see you as a troublemaker because you've taken out that restraining order. And I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice. But that is typically information that can be misleading to some survivors. If someone's getting a restraining order, it's saying, I'm a victim of a crime here and I need protections. And the US government, if they're trying to do their due process, they want to keep the key witnesses, the victim of the crime, present in this country. So that's why a lot of those reliefs are available. But some people may be scared to report because of that fear of deportation or mistrust of systems as well. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, language barriers. So it's really important for advocacy agencies like ours to have interpreting services, to have people on staff who speak multiple languages or at least bilingual, to reflect the needs of the community that are being served. So those are just some of my thoughts.
Well, thank you so much. I think they were great thoughts, just absolutely awesome. I found it interesting because in the past week and a half, like, this program was already scheduled. I already knew that this topic was coming up. But within the past week and a half, I actually had to counsel several individuals who are family members or friends of a person who is being abused or who has been abused. And I had to counsel these individuals in terms of saying and trying to get to understand, this is not about you. Because they were all, different scenarios, different situations. They were all guns blazing. Let's deal with this. She needs to go to jail. And to the victim or survivor, I want him, I want her in a hospital. They need to see this doctor and do that. And I just found it interesting. In each case, I had to say, pump your brakes, stop. This is not about you. And what you are inadvertently doing is re-victimizing this individual all over again, because you're taking whatever power, if they feel that they have any, you're trying to take that away because you're trying to force them into a decision that makes you feel good, not them. And it's very difficult. Some individuals, um, I believe any abuser is in a place of power, but there are some abusers who are literally wielding power because of the positions that they hold in society. So some individuals, if they press charges, if they file a report, they're going to be filing a report and pressing charges against a doctor, against a lawyer, against a judge, against a police officer. And that's not a small issue. You can't just brush that away. And I also had to tell these individuals it's absolutely unfair for you to say to him or her, well, you need to go report this because it could happen to someone else if you don't. That's not fair to put that on someone's shoulders. You are literally not allowing this person to even walk through their own process. I mean, some of these wounds are still fresh. Like they haven't even had the time to fully wrap their minds around it and completely seek out help for themselves and what they need to do and what they want to do. And you're already trying to force them into a courtroom. So I found it interesting, and not that I haven't had to do this before, but it was interesting that it came up again around the time that we were going to have this conversation. Um, and one of the things that I also stressed and informed them is that domestic violence agencies are also there to support the family members, the friends of victims and survivors. I had to tell these individuals, you need help. You do. You need to get information. You need to fully understand what domestic violence is. You need to fully understand what sexual assault is and the ramifications upon this individual and what your actions are doing, your words and your actions. So I do understand, you love your loved one. You love your friend. You love your family member. You want them to be okay. But we really can do harm when we start injecting ourselves into someone else's story. And in a couple of those conversations, um, it really was an individual projecting his or her own feelings because they were thinking of their situation when they were victimized. They didn't press charges. So it was kind of like they were reliving their situation through another person. Like, this is what I wish I had done. So now you go ahead and do that. You can't. You can't do that. And Aaron, I love what you said in the beginning. And I would ask you even to expound on that as you began to speak. You said it's an individual circumstance for everyone. And I don't think that's hard to understand, or it shouldn't be hard to understand. So, Aaron, if you would.
Yeah, thank you. I thought about the barriers that Sam was talking about, and which leads into the unique situations that you brought up. And I think that one of the barriers that's out there is shame. And I mean, like, shame, there's being shamed, right? The fear of being shamed by your community, by the public, by the person who's your abuser, by the system, being shamed by the system. And, like, that is so huge. The fear of that and the legitimacy of that we've seen, the especially we see how people of high profiles, how those situations play out in public, with the media. So it's a really, really touchy situation that then trickles down into the individual's experience. I would say the shame that I'm speaking of is the shame of the victim, and that being a barrier, because if you feel that, if you have that emotion, if you feel that sense of shame, that's going to be a barrier to even exploring what your options are. And then you really don't have the choice, right? The power is not with you, because power equals options and choice.
Yes.
And so you deflect your power because you're carrying a lot of that shame. And so I think each unique situation, the more you can get with friends, family, community, or advocacy groups that can have a level head and a level heart with you, to be able to lay things out, to be able to turn the power back to the victim who's experiencing it, to be able to lay out the choices, but also remind the person that the choice is theirs. I think that becomes the map for the victim to decide which route they want to take in this moment, right? Because there's a triage that has to happen. And sometimes the triage is, you need oxygen, you need a minute, you need whatever that is. But if you have that advocacy group explaining, like, look, you have a time limit on this, right? Like, then you start to prioritize, what are the steps to my decision and my choices? Will I lose the choice to prosecute if I wait? Or can I still, like, what is the dynamics? And it just opens up the door. This conversation is opening up the door to just having all of that information being laid out state by state, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's tons of organizations that do that, but to just have it be in simple, layman's language would be amazing.
Yeah, and I really think that domestic violence agencies who are there for sexual assault, rape victims, I really think it is best to go to them, go to these counselors, go to these directors, and get the proper information before you start telling your friend or family member the wrong thing. Um, and again, Aaron, I agree with everything that you just said. And what you decide in the moment is best for you in that moment. When we get to the next moment, then you decide what you want to do or need to do in that next moment. But Sam, I would love for you to speak to this issue, because erroneously there are family and friends who have told victims and survivors, if you don't file a report, if you don't speak up, you can't get help. That's not true. If you do not report a crime committed against you, that does not mean that you can't speak to counselors. That does not mean that you can't get medical attention. It doesn't mean that if I don't file charges today that I can't do it next week. But really just the services that any victim or survivor would be entitled to. Sam, if you could speak to that. It's like, if I keep this to myself, if I don't go to the police department, I can still see a counselor. Could you speak to that variation of this?
Absolutely. And thank you for drawing attention to that too, because it can be such a I see misunderstandings like that throughout so many different elements of service providing to survivors. So, for instance, emergency safe housing. Sometimes people will think, well, oh, if I'm interested in emergency safe housing, do I have to already have a restraining order to be able to come into that emergency safe house? And for some agencies in the past, that was a standard, that it was like, well, if you're in fear of your life, this is the thing to do next. Step A, step B, step C. But in our modern era, for about the past decade at least, the standard has been, well, would it be safe for you to have a restraining order? Or do you think it would be like waving a red flag in the face of a bull?
Right.
If that's the answer, then no. Like, if you don't want a restraining order, that's not a requirement to be able to get into safe housing. The same thing goes for making reports. You can still be eligible for resources at advocacy agencies if you don't go to a police department, because advocacy agencies recognize all of those barriers that I mentioned before. That fear of retaliation, that is very valid for some folks. Like if somebody says, I know that the person choosing abuse is going to do this if I go and report it, then, well, we want, as advocates, want to make sure that you're supported in all of that safety planning that you need. So counseling services are still available to survivors, even if they've never made a report. A survivor could sit and talk to a court advocate about options and still choose not to make a report, even though they went and sat down with that court advocate. The hotline is always available to folks as well. Something else that both of you brought up too was the where people report, and like if there's fear of who in the family might know a judge, or if there's somebody it's connected to the police department. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, check locally with your local advocacy agencies. You can change the jurisdiction. So in layman's terms, if somebody in your county is connected to the court system and you don't think that you'd get a fair shake in that county, then you could say, all right, I'm going to reach out to another county and make a report there and ask that whatever proceeding I'm interested in experiencing happens in that separate county, by avoiding a conflict of interest in your home county. So if that's something that you're concerned about, reach out to your local agency. You can call those hotlines that Minister Tia discussed earlier to find out where that local agency might be, to give you the most accurate information about where you are. But I've seen that happen routinely in the areas that I work in. Also, if individuals don't feel comfortable going directly to their local police departments and law enforcement agency, they can choose, you know what, I'm going to go straight to the prosecutor's office, or I'm going to go straight to the district attorney's office, depending on where you are, the terminology changes, and make the report directly to them as opposed to going to my local police department. So there's all different ways of reporting too, but with advocacy agencies, it's never a requirement to be able to get those services.
Yes, thank you so much. And I thought about what you were saying earlier. You as you were speaking, you mentioned the scenario of an individual who may want to get a PFA or a restraining order, and family and friends advise them against that. So I want to talk about that part too, because a victim or a survivor may come through their situation and they may feel like, yes, I want to be vindicated in the area of law. I want to file a report. I want to go into a courtroom. I want this to happen. If media is going to be on my front door, then they're just going to be there. And there are some individuals who will advise them against it, you know, as you said, because of deportation issues or because of their career. You know, if your name is out there as a victim survivor and you go through this, it could damage your career. Or the whole family may look bad because of what happened to you. And I think, again, this is a way that individuals make the situation about them instead of focusing on the victim or survivor and what they want to do and don't do. So can you speak more about that? Like when you make the decision, you know what you want to do and you go forward, but then you have family and friends saying, don't do it because you're going to make us look bad.
Yeah, and that's really challenging, and I think goes into some of the shame that Erin was talking about as well. Erin was specifically talking about that shame of the individual because there's so much societal pressure put on people. But then that can also come from those family structures too, and friends and other circles that the survivor might be in. And I tend to go back to thinking about where the person's support system lies. Now, if the people that are around that survivor are not supporting their decisions and are telling them what they need to do or what they can or cannot do, then it sounds like that's perpetuating a lot of the dynamics of power and control that are in relationships where domestic abuse is happening. So some survivors, I'm a psychologist first. So some of the survivors that I speak with who are at various points of their healing journey talk about realizing that certain people that they felt were the support people in their life actually weren't super supportive of them. And as soon as they started setting up healthy boundaries and saying, no, I won't accept that anymore. No, I'm not going to continue doing this. No is a complete sentence on its own. But they realized that some of the people that they thought were going to be sticking with them and supporting them started falling away. And there's a normal grieving process that can come up with that. Grief, we tend to think of it at times when somebody dies and passes away. But grief is a normal human emotion that comes up anytime our life path shifts in a way that maybe we weren't ready for it to. So I talk to survivors about grieving not only the relationship with the person that was choosing to abuse them, if they're choosing to end that relationship, but also the other people that may have been trying to keep them in that relationship through shame or through other means. And that shift can be really challenging to folks. And that's why counseling, again, from my psychologist perspective, can be really supportive to help process the loss of those relationships, but also setting those healthy boundaries and finding the people in their community who are around them who love and respect them and are happy that they're setting up those boundaries. If the people around you are not supportive of the boundaries that you're setting, then that's going to be a big eye opener, big warning sign. The people who love you most are going to be thrilled when you are setting boundaries and standing up for yourself. I was reading this recently that, there was somebody's New Year's resolution that they wanted to keep the people in their life that made them feel more connected to themselves and try to let go of the people who made them feel more disconnected from themselves. So reflecting on that too, who in your circles, who in your support systems makes you feel more connected and more safe, and who makes you feel disconnected, who makes you feel like you need to put on a mask or pretend that things are okay or not address things. In relationships that maybe don't feel balanced, who in your life is maybe taking more than offering in the relationship. We talk about that a lot in romantic relationships, but that goes for our friendships and our family relationships too. There needs to be balance. So that is some of my thoughts on that. And again, it gets so individual to each family unit as well. And there's all these cultural elements too that could come into play. And I've seen that be a struggle for survivors as well.
Yes. Erin, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of tag on to that, sometimes, I mean, again, I think the age of social media obviously has its huge detriments, but just the piece of like more public awareness is probably super helpful. I know for me, two of the situations, one, I'm a sexual abuse survivor, age 15. And at that time, this was in the mid to late 90s, probably mid 90s more, and or early 90s actually now. I feel like there weren't, I just like had no idea, because you're a teen and you're not sure. And now there's way more teen access to information. And so I think that that's like a really huge piece of what we're talking about, of just having access to, oh, this happens, this is a way that you can move forward with this. This is some information you can get, because at that particular time, my family was the barrier. They were actually supporting the abuser. It was a typical grooming situation. And so that being said, there has to be this like community web and this network that comes from all these different angles, not just the family, not just the friend unit. We have to really make sure that we are building a very not a complex web, but an integrated web of many different resources, so that the person that has the experience finds an avenue, because of getting back to those unique situations that people find themselves in, finds an avenue that fits with their scenario, because otherwise it's just, doors slamming in your face.
Mm-hmm. So okay, so Love Bae, full disclosure, and this is just how I do it, because I've said so many times, I am you. Like, I'm living this life with everybody else, trying to get through. And so I've always shared my story of being a victim of domestic violence and everything that I suffered in that, which included sexual assault. The end of 2023, I was a victim of sexual assault at the hands of a police officer. I know who I am. I know what I can do. I knew what I didn't want to do. I made decisions that were best for me because of who that officer is. If I decided to make information public, press charges or whatever, I'm going to have to deal with the media immediately just because of his name alone. And then you throw in who I am and what I do. That's just going to add to it. So I made the best decisions for myself. And so any conversation that we have, again, I'm not saying stuff just to say it. Like, I know what it feels like. It's not easy. And so you go through your experience and you want to be supportive of someone else who had the same experience. But then you have others trying to force you into making a decision that they probably wouldn't make for themselves. That doesn't help. And so there's so much already that you have to deal with the experience that you had. And when I had this experience, it was about 2 weeks later after the actual experience that I started to begin to mentally and emotionally deal with it. It wasn't that I blocked the memory, not that. I just didn't think about it. I just went about my days and my nights doing what I do. I have to work. I'm in ministry. I have a minor. I'm in school. I went about my day every day until it was about 2 weeks later. And it just seemed like all of a sudden, my emotions fell in on me. And then I had to deal with it. And I dealt with it in my way. And so I know what I'm saying when I say, people want to give you their ideas, what they think you should do, and how it may not be the best for you. And it's okay. Whatever you decide to do or don't do for you in that moment, it's okay. And it absolutely is not fair to put it on someone else's shoulders and say, well, if you don't do this, he or she may go off in the future or do whatever. Well, he or she may go off in the future and do whatever anyway. But what's best for me in the moment right now is protecting my minor child, because all the people giving their advice, none of you are coming to my home and going to be with me in 24-hour protection or whatever. I mean, and you really have to, you have to think of those details. You have to think about the safety after the fact. What's going to happen when I'm in that courtroom? What happens when I leave that courtroom? What happens if I go into the hospital and if a rape kit is done? And we know, unfortunately, the process of going through the rape kit, sometimes the nurses are not caring. Sometimes the doctors are not caring. Sometimes that just adds to the trauma that you've already experienced. There's just so much that you have to think of, you have to consider. So if you don't have the right answers, then you direct the person to the organization or the ones who can answer properly. And then if you don't have the right answer, sometimes it's best to say nothing. Just be there. It is absolutely inappropriate to ask a victim or survivor. You start asking questions, you start asking details just because you want to know. When someone talks, they will tell you what they want you to know. And not even that, and maybe Sam, I would, ask if you could probably explain it a bit better. It's not that they're saying what they want you to know. It's just your mind is somewhere else. And so you're just speaking, you're just talking. You could be talking about the weather, and you could be talking about the walls, the colors of the room around you, things that have nothing to do with nothing, but that's just them processing and getting it out. And eventually they get to the important details of what it is. But you just have to let them get it out. It is a terrible idea to start asking questions and asking for details. You can't do that to someone. So at this point, Sam, I just, give it to you and just go from there.
Thank you both so much for your courage in sharing your stories, because it really, for all the listeners out there, that takes a lot of bravery from the two people we just heard from. So thank you for sharing your stories. And I hope that those stories are helpful for you to share, and also that the people listening, that it's helpful to them as well. I'm sure that it was helpful to people who are listening. So thank you both for sharing. This is a big piece of why advocacy groups we're there 24/7, and we don't have a statute of limitations. Survivors can come to us after decades of the initial incidents occurring, and those advocacy agencies are still going to be available to support that survivor. And depending on where you are, the statute of limitations, so that's a legal standard for, some places you have to report within 5 years, or you have to report within 2 weeks of something that happened. And then there's other places that have no statute of limitations, that it could be for your lifetime. Anytime in your life, you could come forward. So your local advocacy agencies, if you have questions about that, will be able to answer what that looks like, depending on where you are. But ultimately, it's so true that the experience of being put on the stand, the experience of having to retell the story over and over again, and then have an attorney questioning you in the courtroom, that can be a lot. And as Minister Tia was saying, for some people, it can be really vindicating to be heard and to be in that courtroom and to have someone throw those questions and have all of those answers. But it can also take a really big emotional toll. A legendary NFL player, Troy Vincent, he grew up in a household where there was domestic abuse happening. His mother's boyfriend chose to abuse her physically and in other ways as well. And Troy Vincent shares the story of growing up and his experiences. And he says every time he shares the story, he's picking at a scab. It's like he opened up the wound and it's still fresh again. So listening non-judgmentally, being quiet and hearing someone, the crux of empathy, of actually being with someone, is listening to them, tapping into a part of yourself that can relate to the emotion that they might be experiencing, even though you're not going to understand their experience, because everybody experiences things differently. But empathy is really being with someone and listening. And you don't have to give advice. You don't have to give your opinion. Sometimes what someone just needs to hear is like, wow, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm just so glad that you told me. That can be a strategy too for folks out there who are looking to support a survivor, or if somebody ever comes to you and shares their story, asking them, are you looking for, and I know I do this in my personal life, are you looking for an advocate? Are you looking for a counselor? Are you looking for legal options? Or are you just looking to sit with your friend and have someone listen? And most of the time, survivors just want to be heard.
Yes.
Most of the time, people just want to be heard.
Absolutely. Erin, you have a question or a comment?
Sure. I think Yeah, I think really putting that disclaimer, when somebody is about to share, who says, "Can I share this with you?" Or they just share it, and then you're hearing, you're listening, and then at the end of that, really getting the directive, again, turning that power back over to them. I think to not ask and to just listen, for me as a survivor, that was very disconcerting to me, because it's like, I just told you, there's a fire in my soul, like in my body, a 911, and thank you for your listening, but like, where's your reaction? Where is, and it was a lot of dead space that I told, and that felt pretty bad for many, many years. But again, that's going back to early 90s. Lots of, so much awareness has, so much has changed in that time frame. So I don't know if that's still going on, but I have a hunch that out there, there's still
Well,
scenarios.
it is. It's still going on, because I mean, again, I've dealt with scenarios on both ends. I've dealt with family and friends who I've had to counsel, pull back. This is not about you, and counseled individuals, and really sometimes even counseling myself. Like, it's okay for you to do A, B, C, and D. It's okay if you don't do A, B, C, and D. And for all of the information that is out there, I mean, all you have to do is go to a computer and do a Google search. You can find information and facts on domestic violence and sexual assault. You can find information on the reactions of victims, how they may deal with trauma. You can find information on abusers and perpetrators, like the personalities. Look for red flags. Information is there. But unfortunately, there still are some cases where an individual may run into the dead space. You may run into someone who does not show empathy, does not show compassion, or who shows so much fire and emotion on the other end where that adds to your trauma as well. If someone is coming to you, first of all, that means that they trust you. And if they trust you enough to share their story, that is not a moment for you to take the opportunity to share what you think and what you feel and try to push them into the direction that you would go because you think that that's the best thing to do. Sometimes the best thing to do is nothing, but you can't make that call. You can't. You cannot force someone to go to a hospital. And everything that you may be saying or thinking and feeling, it may be the right thing to do, but sometimes you can do the right thing at the wrong time. Sometimes you can force what you think is the right thing on a wrong individual, and you end up adding trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. It's bad enough I have to deal with this experience. Then I have to deal with my boundaries being violated by family and friends. Then I have to deal with this invisible responsibility for the world now being put on my shoulders. Then I have to deal with the shame, everything. It just piles on. And you want to be helpful. And I do not believe that people intentionally try to add to your trauma, try to make your pain worse. It's not intentional. But even though it's not intentional, that doesn't make it feel any better. If I tell you my story, if I describe it to you, and the first thing you say is, "Well, I wouldn't have put myself in that situation. I wouldn't have went there with him. I wouldn't have went with her. I wouldn't have gotten into her car." That's not what somebody needs to hear. It's not. So I think even though since the 90s, I think there have been huge strides in information and advocacy. There's still work to be done because that information can be there, but it's up to individuals to open their hearts, to have a compassion. It's up to individuals to learn the information, Because again, each victim, each survivor is different. So where you may have a person who sits down and just spills their guts and tells you everything, another person will sit and not say a word, and it's absolutely okay. Or you may have one person in tears, another person may even have a smile on their face, may be able to laugh and get through their moment. It's up to us to take that information and learn. And it's absolutely not okay. Just like abusers do, they put on one face in front of the crowd and then they abuse individuals privately. It's not okay to pretend to be compassionate. It's not okay to pretend that you are pro victim, pro survivor, and then behind closed doors, you're actually telling someone close to you who has been hurt, you're giving them the wrong information or pushing them in a wrong way. That doesn't help either. So I think a huge part of it lays on society just in general. The information is there, but we have to learn it. We have to go read it. We have to take it in, and we have to exercise it in the right way. And it's not easy. It's really not. But to me, again, I just think be compassionate, be kind, be nice. Then some of us have to work at that more than others, but do it. Or you will cause sometimes irreparable damage in some people's lives. You know, you say something to a 15-year-old, they will carry that into their 60s. I see it today. Say something wrong to a 40-year-old, and they may not be able to go on in the rest of their lives because we were careless in our words or because we were really forceful. Um, in people's lives, people's emotions, people's minds, their psyches, it's real. And we can cause a lot of damage. We can. So, again, I believe, in a sense, the world is a better place with the information, but we still have to take that information, learn it, and disseminate it, exercise it in a proper way. Sam, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm thinking about all of this. I think remembering that we're human first. So expressing genuine human emotion and connecting to ourselves and being vulnerable is really big there. So as somebody who is the trusted person that a survivor is coming to, remember your humanity. Stay connected in that moment because it could be easy. These are hard conversations to want to pull back, to want to run away, to not know what to do. But just stay connected to your humanity. As a survivor, like if you can, trying to tell that person what you need. Telling them like I'm going to tell you something really hard and I don't know, and just express that to them. Tell them what you're looking for. And a piece of advice that has been adapted over the years with myself and fellow advocates, the golden rule. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Mm-hmm. Changing it, just tweaking it slightly. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So what works for you may not work for somebody else, and being mindful of that and thinking, well, what does this person need? If you're not sure, ask. If you're not sure, check in, but also trust your instincts as a human. Trust your connection that you have with that person and offer you humanity.
Yes. Well, Love Bay, we are just under the hour, so I'm going to ask you both to give us a final word. Aaron, I will ask that you go first, but I wanted to mention one more thing. I wanted to say, if someone comes to you and they're sharing their heart, they're sharing their story with you, families and friends of victims and survivors, you can get counseling for yourself to get you through the process. But you absolutely have no right and should not share someone else's story with anybody else. So you cannot go to the rest of the family and share what was shared with you in confidence. You cannot go to someone's job. You cannot go to someone's friends and share their trauma, which was shared with you confidentially. You cannot do that. So be mindful of not only not projecting your thoughts and your feelings onto someone else, but not taking someone else's personal information, their hurt and their pain, and sharing it amongst family and friends, coworkers, or whomever. You cannot do that. So I wanted to say that. And with that, Erin, if you would give Love Bay your final words for tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Evangelist Tia. Thank you, Sam. This has been a really powerful conversation. It's opened up some more questions that I have. I think one of the things that you said, Tia, earlier about when you said it really quickly because you were on a roll, and like this little thing came out, and you said about how if somebody tells you, well, what if they do this again to the next person? And I think that's a big weight, right? I think that's a big weight for survivors, for victims, for, what if he or she, what if they do it to another person down the road, a child, whatever the situation is. And in that moment, in your trauma, in your fight or flight, freeze and fawn response, after you experience violence of any kind, you're automatically taking it upon yourself in your processing, attempting to protect other people. And literally, like physiologically, we know that we can't really do that. That's why the plane going down, like that same metaphor that we always hear of, like you put your oxygen mask on first, and then you help the other people on the plane, right, from drowning. We know this in so many situations. For whatever reason, this is not something that comes to mind in abuse cases. We automatically take it upon ourselves as victims. Oh my God, what if that? And I think that there's time for that question. But if you have not tended to yourself in a way where you feel like your feet are on the ground and you have some clarity, where you're out of the stress response, then it's really not a great question to ask. So if you are the listener, if you are supporting somebody in this process, it's really like a moot point, actually, especially a fresh survivor situation. It is just not a great question to be asked. So that's what I want to share. And just, again, thank you both so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. So, Sam, if you would just give our Love Bay listeners and viewers a final word on tonight about reporting or not reporting domestic violence and sexual assault.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Erin. It's been really wonderful hearing your thoughts and perspectives. And as usual, thank you so much, Minister Tia. It's lovely to always see you. Some other final thoughts that I'm having as far as reporting is that there could be avenues to reporting in your life that may not be as obvious. So reaching out to your local agency to ask questions is obviously a great asset that we've spoken about a lot. But if you are in a school, your school may have different reporting policies based on where you're at. And there might be resources or supports within your school. Your business or corporation or agencies that you work at or work with might have different policies as well. Militaries are going to have different policies than maybe civilian criminal justice systems might have. So if you're in the military, there might be a different procedure available to you. So finding that there's different avenues, you might be able to report to a medical professional. And all of these different groups, like in the United States, if you report to your college or university that you've experienced a type of domestic violence or sexual violence on campus, they do not automatically place a call to law enforcement. They have their own procedures internally that they handle. So being mindful of there's could be different possibilities in your life through different systems available to you. And that there's some research that you can do yourself if you're even uncomfortable reaching out to an advocacy agency to start with, because the idea of sharing your story with anyone feels a little scary. So there's typically, depending on where you are, a bill of victims' rights, and you can see what that victims' rights documentation actually looks like for you. So sharing that. But if it's never feels like a good time to share to make a report, know that you can always still call a hotline anonymously to maybe share some of that weight, to try to take some of that weight off of keeping it to yourself, because you don't have to call a hotline and list all the specific information. You can say, I just want to talk. I'd rather be anonymous, and that's okay. So thank you, everyone, for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Sam, for being with us on tonight. I was really hoping that this would be a conversation that would be helpful. I hope that all of our conversations would be helpful, but this topic, I wanted to be able to bring some ease to somebody's heart, because I could feel it. I've been seeing it and I've been feeling it. So I pray that this was helpful. If you want to catch up, Left Bay, on some of our previous episodes, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We thank you so much for joining Suffering in Silence with Evangelist Tia. We are here on Left Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. And Left Bay, we want you to remember that we're rising out of the ashes together. Good evening.